Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to The Art as Well. My guest this morning is a writer. He has written 3 novels. He's written 6 books of memoirs, several plays, including 5 for the Abbey Theatre. He has a column in the Irish Times, which he calls a creative column of ordinary life. He's a member of Isadona for his contribution to Irish culture. And he has toured multiple venues all around the country with his Evening with Michael Harding. Now, obviously, since lockdown, he hasn't been doing that. So he took to the airwaves by way of a podcast, which has become very popular. And he does, I think, 1 a week on that. And it's just called the Michael Harding Podcast. But since lockdown, he's done this and built up, as I say, quite a following. He's also very well known to viewers of The Art as Well as being the husband of the wonderful sculptor, Kathy Carman. So you know, Kathy was on about 7 months ago, I think. So let's go straight to Donegal and say hello to Michael Harding. Good morning, Michael. How are you?
Good morning, Alan.
Well,
and good morning, everybody else.
Well, Michael, the first thing I have to ask you is how did your eye operation go? Because you were meant to be with us about 4 weeks ago, and at the last moment you had to cancel it because of your detached retina.
Yeah, well, they stuck it back in, and it seems to be, it's not working yet. So I can see out of one eye.
Yes.
And the other one should be back in action, I hope, in another 3 or 4 weeks.
Can you drive?
Yes, yeah, you can drive fairly good.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good memory, you know.
Yeah.
And just somebody telling you
turn left
in front of you. Yeah.
I know.
Turn left here, there's a big gap.
That helps.
Yeah. Or slow down, that's a car in front of you.
Yeah. You can say, oh, yeah, I kind of see that blur, yeah.
Yeah, but basically I'm not really driving.
No, okay, all right.
No, I'm just stuck in a house.
You're stuck in a house, and this is your studio in Donegal.
Yeah.
Is that somewhere that really inspires you?
It's somewhere I can come to be alone.
Yeah.
You know, to have the sort of, I mean, I have a studio space in Lateral where we live.
Yeah.
But we got this place about 2 years ago. Both of us use it. Kathy uses it for her creative art as well, for small.
Oh, does she?
Yeah. There's
right.
She's a little space outside in the back.
But
we tend to use it more like an art center, so that we tend to be here separately.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? Because I used to go to Warsaw a lot to write. I would take an Airbnb for, say, 8 weeks or 6 weeks. And that's the only way you could get a book done, because, you know, you can work, I find as a writer, you can work creatively having the space outside the house, and you go out in the morning and you do your work, and you come in at the evening and you're having a normal family life. But when you're dealing with the blank pages, that becomes a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week sort of obsession.
Yes. And
so you really, or I should say, I need to go away to do that. And I always went to Warsaw for various reasons. Some of them economic, because you get a flight for about €70 in winter, and you get an Airbnb, which would cost you less than running a car in Ireland.
Yes.
And so you'd be on the street, you'd live very simply, the snow would be falling, and you'd be there in a kind of a dream world. You get about 2 months, and you'd really have the bones of your book done. You might come back then and you might need another 3 or 4 months to kind of structure it and shape it and all the rest of it. But to kind of, you wouldn't be working on blank pages.
No, I was going to ask you what your sort of typical work week is. But obviously you do something like that. You immerse yourself by literally hiding yourself away.
That's if you're working on blank pages. It happens once every 2 years.
Okay.
Because the kind of cycle for me would be, over the past decade, I've probably done a book every 2 years. And so that would be a kind of a pattern. And if you're working on columns, or if you're rewriting and you're editing a book, it's very pleasurable to do it when you have a shed outside. You go out to the shed and you work for the day, and you come back in, and then you can socialize for the evening. But just to get the blank pages, you know, in front of you, and actually get a shape of what you're going to try and write, I find it also like to me, all this stuff is like it's like meditation, you know. So like my writing ties in with some sense of kind of faith experience. It's kind of existentially examining who you are as a human being. And then because you don't know who you are, you write down something and then you read it and you kind of discover yourself in what you've written, you know. So that's the kind of process. I'm not, you know.
I wonder how planned is your writing, you know, because you tend to kind of work on strands of ideas or concepts that aren't necessarily related. There might be a tenuous relationship, but then that brings you to another area. You know, when you write a book, do you know it's going to be about a particular topic?
No.
Okay.
Except it will be an examination of, you know, how I have been in the world for the past 2 years. How did I embody consciousness in the past 2 years?
Yes.
And what did I, in some sense, unlearn? Like, what has confused me? You know.
Yeah.
I think I write. I've always written autobiographically, even when I was writing plays and when I was writing books. And then I kind of discovered there's a great Buddhist phrase that says, make all practice one practice. And don't make a soup of your practice.
Yes.
Like that happens in kind of mindfulness and meditation. People sometimes are very eclectic, you know, they'll be doing yoga 1 month and then you meet them 6 months later and you say, how's the yoga going? They say, oh, I'm doing Tai Chi, you know.
Yeah.
And then a year later, they might be, you know, a Reiki master. And then they might throw in a bit. Do you know what I mean? That like, you have to start as a young person testing out all these different practices of mindfulness. But as you get older, I think it's a good idea for me to feel, make all practice one practice, that everything you're doing is the same thing. You kind of unify your life. I think aging is about unifying your life into the simplicity that you're just sitting there. I used to think that old people sitting in the corner staring out the window were kind of sad. But now I realize they're enlightened. They have reached a sense of serenity and clarity about the life, about embodying consciousness for this transient time of 70 years.
Yes.
And that's quite beautiful. So making all practice one practice is one big thing for me. And I mean, it's something that visual artists, I find, very often do more than writers, because in my experience, I've often noticed how a lot of visual artists are great cooks. A lot of painters I know are amazing cooks. They're just amazing. And they go at the cooking in the same way as they're going at the painting. You know, there's a kind of a sensate engagement with the paint and the smell of oil, and then there's an engagement with Brussels sprouts and, you know, peppers and things. And you know, as an outsider, as a writer who's not like that, you can see it in them. You can see this extraordinary kind of, as they get older, they're unifying all practice into just being a human being in the world. And I think that's really nice. And
well, you went through that process too, presumably. You know, I mean, that's why to use a title of your book, you're a Buddhist on Tuesdays.
Yeah, and that's why I don't, when I'm answering the question, I suppose, that I don't plan anything.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? That at this stage, I know less than I did yesterday. And if I wrote a few sentences or a few pages today, I hope I would know less tomorrow when I read it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know.
And do you ever draw a blank when you're?
Yeah, all the time.
Do you? And what do? Go for a walk, or?
I think the blank is good. You know. I mean, that's okay. That's like looking at, you know, a lake that's still. It's full of fish. It's okay. Don't be worried about. Like I what would terrify me is to be a kind of a writer who has a plan. You know.
Yeah.
You know, who's a whole shape of like, well, I wrote that because of this, and I wrote this because of that, and next year I'm going to write another thing because of something else.
Yes.
I mean, there's a causality in that that it seems to me tightens up the possibility of being human.
Mm.
I say, when I go touring, like on stage, I go out in front of the audience, and I genuinely say, I remember one time in Galway on the town hall, and it was the first time I was on the stage in the town hall as, you know, doing my show.
Mm-hmm.
And I was terrified, and the phrase came out of me, "It's great to be here, but I haven't a fucking clue what I'm going to say." And the audience, you know, laughed and clapped that great. Yes. And from that moment on, I was at home, because I realized one of the most secure places you can be is when you have nothing to say, when you don't know. Mm. You know, yeah. I mean, if I came here and presented myself as somebody who had something to say, then I'd probably be scared, because that's a burden to be carrying around with you. You know, I know something.
Yes.
But there's a strange liberation in genuinely saying that I don't know anything. So if I throw out an idea, if I say something about what I think about art or something, it's not that it's true. It's just that I'm saying it at that moment.
Yeah.
It may have a grain of truth to it. It may be a pathway towards some sort of intimacy or connection with some other human being. Mm. Like the same way as I might, you know, be out in Donegal this afternoon, and I'd say, "Tasha Garo and you know, it's rough today, fucking windy, right?"
Yeah.
And you might have a conflict, but you're only throwing out a kind of a rope across to the other boat to see, does anybody pick it up?
Yeah, yeah.
That's all language is, I think. You know.
Michael, you've been referred to as a stand-up philosopher. Are you comfortable with that title?
I like that title, yeah.
Yeah. I like it too, I must say.
Yeah.
But
well, I
genuinely,
have to say, like, you know, I was there was one time it's about 8 years ago, and I was used to doing one-man shows. So, you know, I would learn a script about, let's say, The Traveling Man, or I learn a script about Jonathan Swift. And you go around the country and you do the play. Mm. And I always felt that the word play and playfulness is the nature of theatre. And I worked one time in France with a crowd called Théâtre de Radeau. And the French theatre has a great sense of play. Like when the director would be getting everybody back in after, we'd have a coffee break, and then the director would be calling everybody back into the tent to begin rehearsal again. He'd say, you know, jouer, you know, play.
Play, yeah.
He'd actually say, like an Irish director would say, "Come on, I think we're about to get back to work."
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And there they'd be saying, "Come on, back in now, play." And that sense of playfulness as being the core of theatre, you know, I did a play. Mm. In the country, in fact, in West Cavan, people used to say, if somebody was good entertainment in a pub, I remember there was a phrase that used to say, "Jesus, he's a great play."
Yeah.
He's great fun. He's a great play.
Yes.
And so I like that idea of being playful. So I was lucky one time, Tommy Tiernan and myself got together and we did 3 shows about 7 years ago, one in Mayo and one in Limerick and one in the Pavilion. Mm-hmm. And the key to it, as Tommy was really interested in this, was the idea of, because we didn't know each other, so we didn't meet until we were on the wings at 8 o'clock one night down in Limerick, and that was the first time I met Tommy Tiernan. I shook his hand. Mm. I'd absolutely nothing prepared, neither had he, and there was 400 people had just paid about 20 euros each to see us.
Yes.
And that was like a real revelation. It was like somebody saying the only way to learn how to use a JCB is get up in it and use it, you know, because it allowed me break free from the script and break free from the idea that theatre all my life had been about getting the script right and learning it. And it allowed me into a space of great chaos, which is what I follow now, both when I'm touring, but also when I'm doing the podcast. I don't prepare it in a logical, rational way. Mm-hmm. I just kind of, I try and get
improvisation, isn't it?
Zone.
It's improvisation.
It is improvisation, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Life is
that's what I said.
Life is improvisation.
Yeah.
That's why I'm a stand-up philosopher.
I know, yeah. Well, when I sent the email out to everybody with the link, I said, you know, this is totally unscripted. We don't know where the conversation is going, but that's the beauty of live chat.
Yeah,
and
it is
throw out the script.
Yeah.
Yeah. It can be daunting because you said yourself that when you did it first on stage, you were pretty scared.
Yeah, but that's only because it was on stage with all those people. You know, there's a kind of responsibility. But I mean, I think that this kind of conversation, the conversations that, you know, there's a lot of discourse going on the internet at the moment.
Mm.
I mean, what you're doing is wonderful in Ireland for the arts. It's wonderful to have a kind of a sort of communal conversation going on every week. Mm. And there's more of that will come, I think, because people are discovering that you can liberate yourself from sort of preconceived ideas.
Yes.
You know, like you get up in the morning and you look in the mirror, you're brushing your teeth, you look in the mirror, and you start to develop a narrative of who you are for the day. And sometimes you can tighten that too much. You know, you can create a straitjacket for yourself before you walk out the door. Mm. Right?
Yes, yes.
And sometimes if you just, you know, loosen up that, and one of the great ways to do it is in conversation.
Yeah.
You know, I'd often see a cross person, you know, and they'd be kind of totally locked up in some intellectual argument about politics or something. And then they would meet somebody on the street, right, who would be talking about cabbages. And their whole energy would change. And they'd continue on down the street and they'd be a different person. You'd say to them, you're a completely different person than you were for the past 2 hours.
Yes, yes.
Because the conversation had completely, it's like a nuclear explosion inside them. It just breaks down those straitjackets of identity that we keep constructing, you know?
Yeah, you are what you think.
You're not even what you think. See, I think you're actually, you are what you remember. You are what you remember yourself 5 minutes ago.
Yeah.
You're constantly embodying who you are. You're constantly, whatever your name is, you embody this consciousness. Yeah. But you can never actually be awake until you remember. There's no moment. Maybe there is after death. Maybe that death is like a transition from caterpillar to butterfly, which is possible, because that's a phenomenal miracle within nature. But maybe that's what happens. I don't know. But certainly in this lifetime, in this present moment, there's no way that you can actually be conscious without already embodying consciousness. So your consciousness is constantly remembering. And if you think about all narrative art, like movies or stories, whatever, they're constantly acts of remembrance. I mean, I talk about memory all the time. I moved into doing memoir as a kind of what I think is like the new novel in some sense, because it's an act of remembrance that kind of builds possibilities of who we are, and also gives you the chance to change that possibility to a completely different script if you want to. But this sense of who you are cannot happen. It's the mystery of consciousness, you know, that you're there. If you name the bird, you cease to experience the song, to say in Japan, apparently. All right. Yeah. So every time you name yourself, you're already further ahead. Every time you name yourself, you're not actually there in yourself.
Yes, yes, yes. And is all your writing sort of focused on this self-discovery?
No, it's the two tricks that I use. We'll say three tricks I use in writing. One is to try and write about something that's there in front of me, which is why I, you know, end up in the columns in the Irish Times, and I'm always writing about, you know, somebody at a petrol pump at a gala shop in Portlaoise talking to their wife in the car or something, you know, because it's something, it's happening there.
Yes.
And that's one thing I do. The other is I try to be free about about changing from one thing to another thing rather than following an idea. So that I think that what people like about the books and about the columns is that there's an awful lot of lateral stuff. You know, I like to go sideways because I think that the sideways only look sideways when you're thinking intellectually, but when you're actually emotionally conscious or with your heart conscious, we go sideways. You know, the color of a white tablecloth makes me think of the color of a card that brings a bride to the altar, and that starts me thinking about something else. You know,
yes.
like, yeah.
What? How do you slow your mind down? Because you're obviously very creative, and you know the way you deal with things like this, it's sort of one thing leads to the other, et cetera, et cetera. But how do you actually stop thinking? And do you think it's important to stop thinking? Because I would have thought so.
I mean, I think in one sense, I can't stop thinking because thinking is a kind of process of self-reflection. It's the grammar of consciousness. But I wouldn't be thinking, the fact that I use language, I dream in conversations.
Do you? Yeah.
I always dream in conversations. I've always dreamt people just talking to me, but I really have no intellectual ability. So I don't have a problem with thinking the way that, you know, very intelligent people do. There's guys out there and they have a high IQ and they have, you know, scholarly backgrounds, and you'd be thinking, Jesus, it must be hard for them to be going around with all that.
Yeah, well, they probably have a low EQ.
I don't have that. I mean, I really don't. My language comes out emotionally rather than from some sort of intellectual space, which is why I'm not an intellectual, I'm not a scholar, and I know nothing. And there you go. I mean, I know nothing. And everything I've said so far is not true.
But it might be tomorrow.
But it isn't. But you'll only find wisdom if you keep going beyond all these postulated ideas.
Yeah.
Intellectually, I think.
Yes.
So I don't find it easy to stop thinking. I can look at the lake or I can look at the ocean now for the rest of the day and I'll have very little thoughts.
But are you accumulating words and stories to write?
I don't think so.
Not necessarily.
Honestly,
no?
I think my vocabulary is very limited. I think in many ways, I really think like I'm of not great significance as a writer. I don't think, you know, I'm a very minor animal here.
Well, no.
You know, honestly,
I
I heard Judi Dench this morning on the radio talking about, you know, those two wild ducks came to her garden and they're black and white, and she calls them Bib and Tucker. And I thought, how English can you get, right?
Yes, yeah.
But I also thought, how huge is the English vocabulary, you know, in somebody with a wide experience of life like Judi Dench, and how ferociously limited the Irish vocabulary tends to be, because whether you like it or not, it's just not the native language in the Irish psyche. You know,
Yeah.
We'd never have two ducks called Bib and Tucker. But I love the sound of those two words. Isn't it lovely? Bib
It is.
and Tucker. Yeah. And Bib brings you into when you were a baby and somebody was stuffing goo in your mouth saying, fix your bib.
Yeah.
You know, and then, and Tucker makes me think of Carla Tucker. I mean, these are the inconsequential ways my unruly mind works. Carla Tucker was the first woman executed in Texas for decades.
Oh, right.
Yeah, when George, what was his name? George of Iraq, Lord George of the Bush.
Yeah.
When he was governor of Texas, he brought in a little bit of law and order. So there was a poor woman, she'd be about 20 years hanging around death row, and he decided we'll finish her off to look good, you know.
I know, yeah.
Yeah, and I always remember her name. I always, when I'm praying, I pray for her.
Yeah.
when I'm talking to saints, she talks to me.
Interesting. Michael, I know you're a very religious man, but you're sort of religious in a non-orthodox way, I would have hoped. Have you come to this conclusion over years of sort of practical experience?
Well, yeah. I mean, again, am I religious? Just before I answer it, there was a thing came into my head, just as a bottom line. I think there's an art critic in America. I think her name was Susie or Susan Gablick. And she once used a phrase about art, which I really liked, and that was that art is the tracks of the animal. It's the inconsequential markings that you leave behind you, like footprints.
Yes.
And I feel that would be my way of thinking about art, or thinking about writing as an art form, storytelling as an art form. So I just wanted to say that. And in relation to religion, the only thing I can say there is that it exemplifies how wrong I am about everything. You know, because like I've made all the kind of crazy mistakes you could make in 5 lifetimes. And, you know, there's no need to go into the patriarchy of the institutional Christian churches, the disaster they have been for society, the horrific damage they have done to society, the ingrained misogyny against women that is at the absolute core of their message, right? I wrote a play, by the way, in the Abbey called Misogynist in 1991, which kind of tried to illustrate and track the essential misogyny of the Christian message, you know, trickling down for 2,000 years. Anyway, without going into that, which is the politics of it, you think, well, you know, when you got on that bus, you got on the wrong bus. And I was ordained as a priest. And I still to this day would use icons and follow the Russian Orthodox tradition as a kind of a meditation practice. Yeah. The same way as I would use mindfulness, or the same way as I would use Tibetan Buddhist practice. I would use the Christian idea, the kind of what it opens up in my heart is a hugely beautiful space of transformation, the possibility of transformation. And I think that we live in a world where we're really in trouble because we have in the West, we don't have institutions or kind of cultural things that give us enough transformation. So there's a fierce amount of despondency, a fierce amount of despair, you know, dysfunction. We're getting really worried in ourselves about where all this is going with climate change and with, you know, it's like the world is on fire, you know, politically as well as just ecologically. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know what happens when you don't have some kind of practice that is transformative. And that's probably what art is as well. It's you know, it certainly, to my mind, should be a kind of a transformative process. I know.
I mean, I personally think the appeal you have, and to a lot of young people, and I've heard this since I told a few people that you're coming on, you know, young people really admire your sort of philosophy. Yeah. Because really there's a huge confusion amongst people with the traditional church, which, you know, you only have to look at it. It's like, do kids read newspapers anymore? No, they don't. Yeah. None of my kids have ever bought an Irish Times or an Indo or anything like that. Yeah. It's all online, okay? Yeah. So things can change very, very quickly, and attendance at church can change very, very quickly. Yeah. And you know, the age profile is significant. So it's only a matter of time before that changes, in which case there has to be some substitute. I think people deeply need some form of spirituality. Yeah. Otherwise you get completely lost. Yeah. And you know, like, I think to a degree that's why people like listening to you, because I think you give that hope. in the sort of concepts that you talk about.
Yeah, but if I do, the only thing I'm given is again the sense of not knowing.
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
the sense of
yeah, but that's truth. That's truth. You're talking.
All I can say is that, you know, my children, my two beautiful children, wouldn't have ever heard me encouraging them to be Christians, ever.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And they will have to find their own meaning and their own grammar and language of transformation in their lives. But I still use what I grew up with, which works for me.
Yeah.
And the poetry of the Christian tradition, I find very powerful. And I find that when I'm practicing Tibetan Buddhism, it sinks into the whole Christian rhythm as if the two came out of the same source.
Really?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
As all religions do, by the way. I mean, I have a great friend, a good companionship at the moment with a guy from Syria who's Islamic. And he teaches me many, many things about Rumi and the Sufi tradition. And it's Karen Armstrong, she's a great English theologian. And she said it eloquently one time. She said, religion is like art. It's rarely practiced well. But she makes this point that it's an art form.
Yeah.
So that possibly what we're seeing in the West is institutional religion is over completely, and it's not coming back. In fact, it will wither much more than it has so far. But what may be the continuum is the internalization of the symbolism in a Jungian way, and a kind of a powerful use of Christian faith in the dynamic of transformation to allow people live, you know, healthy lives and loving lives.
Balanced, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's very, very, very interesting. Very interesting. I know there's going to be a load of people who want to ask questions. I haven't even looked at the comments yet, but at some point I always ask the artists we have on who their favorite artist is, and you know what piece they'd love to hang over their mantelpiece, whether it's stolen from a museum or bought at an auction with no money, doesn't matter. The money doesn't come into it, and they can be living or dead. In your case, I was going to ask you, if you were to have a dinner party, what guests would you invite? Who would you love to have around the table to have a good old natter with, which you're very good at? Who would be able for you, Michael?
I'd invite anybody. I wouldn't invite writers because they're fierce boring and they talk a lot and they have all opinions, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, the image of McDaid's and all these pubs in Dublin, Grogan's, was an image of these guys. Like sometimes they're described, you know, Behan and Paddy Cavan and these guys, they're described like some sort of great gods in the great world of great poetry in the old days, you know.
Yes, yeah.
And Anthony Cronin, like a young scribe, writing it all down, what they're all saying. It must be wonderful to be there. I'd say the last place you'd ever want to be would be next or near any of them. Bollocks is the lot of them, right? I mean, they may have been geniuses, they may have been interesting, but my suspicion is that they were feckin' unpleasant when they got into their second and third pint in McDaid's, right? So I don't think I'd love Patrick Kavanagh's poetry, and it woke me up when I was 16 and even maybe 13, 19. I think it was 1966 when O'Keeffe Publishing House put together the collected poems of Patrick Kavanagh, and I had it under my desk in the study hall in St. Pat's in Cavan, and I used to love reading it, all those poems about, you know, pedatas and ridges and headlands, and written in a language that as a Cavan person you could understand, because I know Monaghan people are inscrutable, but the kind of dialect is the same, you know?
Yes.
So I loved Patrick Kavanagh at that time, and I do think he was very much a mystical poet, which is missed now, you know, that he kind of had this sort of real deep medieval Catholic sense of the sacramental nature of the world. And that's really what imbues his poetry. And the only other writer that comes up with that stuff as good, in my opinion, is Dermot Healy. And Dermot Healy's great poem about the geese, that big long poem. That's an extraordinary song of the sacramental nature of the cosmos. It's amazing. Yes. Anyway, I still wouldn't like to have Paddy Kavanagh, those kind of fellas, at the dinner table. And I don't think I'd like to have James Joyce either, because he'd be too erudite. Do you know what I mean? He'd be asking me questions and throwing out phrases in Latin to see had I read me Cicero or something, and I wouldn't have a fucking clue what he'd be talking about. And I think I would like Samuel Beckett, I have to say, because I think he suffered a fair bit from the old melancholia, and I think, and he had problems with his eyes. He was having eye issues as well, and he went to therapy for years. So I think I'd have a lot in common with him. I also think that Beckett was like, again, he's like a saint in the strange existential world after World War II, when the landscape was just devastated by darkness and by the violence of the war and what was done in the Holocaust to the Jews. And there's Beckett, and he comes back to Paris, and a lot of his friends who were Jews were gone. They'd either fled or dead. And in that, he wrote Waiting for Godot, and wrote it very much declaratively about the prison camps, you know, until it was later. Like originally, I think he had them even in the striped uniforms of Auschwitz, Vladimir and Estragon. And you know, as it unfolded as a play, people, you know, suggested that he just kind of try and strip it down to make it more universal. And that he did that and it worked. But I find him like a really spiritual writer. You know, he's like Teresa of Avila, except the environment he's working in is this secular devastation of the end of the 20th century. So of course he's not going to be speaking the language of the saints, but he's still looking for the same sense of almost like sacramental presence in a human being. And I think that all his theatre work are very much comedy in the sense of divine comedy, in the sense of like, you know, somebody in a wheelchair, somebody getting out of a dustbin. They're like so strangely poetically powerful as manifestations of what the poor of the world is, where there is this immeasurable humanity, you know?
Yes.
And yet he does it in a way that's bleakly comic. So yeah, I wouldn't mind him at the dinner table.
Yeah. So
I don't think.
So this is basically dinner for two now, Michael, right?
Me and Beckett. No, I'd have Teresa of Avila as well.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Yeah, I think I'd bring her because she'd bring the intellectual stuff.
Yes. Yeah.
She'd talk fucking through the whole thing, and Beckett would just put his head on the table and say, "Will she ever shut up?" Oh God, Jesus.
Wonderful. Okay, listen, I'm going to start looking at some of the comments that have been made in no particular order, probably starting with the excuse me, the earliest, where I've been saying good morning. Thank you very much. Good morning to you. Maria Gabriela Serpi says, in fact, the French say jouer le rôle.
Play the role, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Donna McGuire, great analogy about the straitjacket. We need to be awake, going beyond our memories of self. Wow. More wisdom, Michael. Thank you. Marianne, religion and meditation and art all come out of the same head, maybe, I think. Thank you for putting it so clearly, Michael. Yeah, so religion, meditation and art all come from the same space, same place. Yvonne says, loads of thinking thoughts there from you, as is your wont. Thank you. Great to listen to you. Stephanie, you're a breath of fresh air. Thoroughly enjoying the chat. Thank you. Nicola Carrigan, a fascinating conversation, very inspiring. Catherine Gagan, so enjoyed reading A Cloud Where Birds Rise. Made me cry, laugh out loud and ponder. Actually, on that, can you just, have you got that book there with you? This is your latest book, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just show it us there. Michael, is there anything you'd like to read from any of the books, particularly your new book? Lovely, beautiful production.
Will I read something from it?
Would you please? Yeah, and then I'll get to the rest of them.
I called it a cloud where the birds rise. That cloud is like, they talk about the cloud of unknowing. Mm-hmm. But recently, I noticed there's a beautiful word in the English language. It's nuance. Mm. And nuance is a lovely idea.
Yes.
It's that you're never gripping one particular way of looking at it.
Yeah.
And it comes again from the French word, I think, nu, or Latin, for the cloud. Oh. Anyway, I'm just randomly. One morning, I looked out at tiny flecks of snow falling, and at a coy blackbird sitting on the trellis waiting for other birds. And it thrilled me to be out of town at last, especially with the promise of snow in the sky. In front of me, the mountain is covered with mist, and below me, the lake is like a mirror. Loch Allen was blue. The sky was blue and cold. A long tuft of white cloud, like cotton wool, hung on the ridge of Slieveneeren. Around me, the alder trees and the primroses were flourishing. The slope of the lawn was riddled with holes where the badgers fed at night. In the woods behind where I was sitting, there was a carpet of snowdrops. A single magpie stood guard high up in the pines, and along the beech hedge, a wren was hopping about looking for things that I knew nothing about.
Wonderful. Beautiful, beautiful. Poetry.
Well, it's just simple. It's just like, yeah. I read a letter on my podcast last night from a listener, a patron, and it was superb. Mm. Like, it was a masterpiece.
Yeah.
And I have always written with my ears, in the sense that I listen to people and what they say is far better than what I write. And the way they say it is far better than the way I write.
Yes.
And that is a fact.
Yeah.
People are out there just telling stories, and it's absolutely a joy just to be listening.
Well, I would suggest that people get onto their list of podcasts and add you in if they haven't already. The Michael Harding podcast, and just search for it. And you'll find that actual letter, which I listened to on my walk this morning, funnily enough. And it's an extraordinary letter, beautifully, beautifully written. And I'm not surprised that you were struck by it.
Like it's a piece of literature, because it's so simple. There's no complex sentences. It's just describing something happening.
Yeah. It's wonderful. Okay, I'm going to read out a few more, Michael. Derek Cully says, "A Bridge to Hope." This is referring obviously back to earlier conversations. Maura Finnegan says, "Dinner party guest suggestions. Judi Dench for the dry English vocabulary." I thought you'd like that, yeah.
I'd like Judi Dench at the dinner table.
Yeah,
I fancy her.
Yeah. Oh, would you now?
Oh, she's...
I hope Kathy isn't watching. And Magan for the richness of Gaelic vocabulary. Beckett to match it all together. Now, Tim Goulding says, "I'm a nudist in summer and a Buddhist in winter."
Yeah, well, good man, Tim. Keep it up.
Exactly. My beloved says, to use your term, Michael, Trina says, "For a lot of women, they only come around to exploring the practice, meditation, yoga, Reiki, etc. from midlife on. As they grow older, there's a freedom to play in the soup, which they won't have had time to enjoy before they reach this age." Absolutely love your wisdom, Michael, and laughed out loud so often this morning. The dog thinks I've gone mad. So, and Catherine Gagan loved the woman in the sauna.
Yeah.
Okay.
So did I.
Yes. Maria says, "Nuance is in fact a word of French origins, as in nuage." Yeah. Morris Quillinan says, "The dinner party would have been written." The dinner party could have been written by Beckett. Yes. Yeah.
Alan.
Yes. Eamon.
Hi. How are you?
Hiya. Good.
Good morning, Michael. Lovely.
Good morning, Eamon.
I just want to finish off. I have to rush off now, but I just wanted to tell a wee story about Michael that I think shows the man, really. I, with great joy, ended up in Anamacarrick in the 80s. And in 1988, my parents were in a very serious car crash. And my mother was very seriously injured, and my dad, who was an artist, lost his right eye in the accident, but was also very seriously injured. And I had to get the bus down from Anamacarrick down to Dublin. And Michael came with me on the bus. Never said a word to me, sat beside me, never said anything to me all the way down. We just made this journey in silence. I was very shook by the whole experience of, I was only in my early 30s at the time. My dad was a ball of anxiety. He was shocked by what he'd done to my mother, shocked by the whole experience of being in a car crash. And about 20 minutes after I arrived in the hospital, Michael arrived. And he just sat down by the bed and he took my father's hand and said nothing. And spent about 20 minutes, and he would, every now and again, he would lean over and he'd rub my father's forehead. And my dad said nothing, was just crying most of the time he was there. Anyway, I walked Michael out of the hospital, thanked him, said goodbye, went back in, and my father's anxiety was gone. He was at peace with himself. And very sadly, he died from the injuries received in the car crash a couple of months later. But for the rest of his life, the anxiety that he'd had all his life probably was gone. So I'd like to say publicly, thank you, Michael, for that. It's something I will always, always remember, is that sheer act of, and it wasn't just kindness, it was being with somebody, just sharing a moment of great transition for him from one life into another life. So thank you. That's all. I just wanted to say that.
Thank you, Eamon. Thanks very much indeed for that, Eamon.
I loved it.
Lovely story. Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Thank you, Eamon.
Bye.
Okay, anybody else like to make a comment, say hello?
I'll say something, Alan.
Of course you may, Catherine.
Hi, Michael.
Hello,
really,
Catherine.
How are you? I really enjoyed your wisdom. And just what you were saying about how our whole identity is informed by memory, our memories. The blight of memory loss and dementia is a terrifying prospect.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that?
No, except it's an astonishing, yeah. I
have a family member, so I just,
no, I
can see it.
I don't have a close family memory, but I have close friends who have a family member. I've one story, like I know a woman who was an opera singer. She's Irish, but she was, she was doing the full gig during her life and beautiful. And she kind of cut it short when she married. Because again, those days and all the rest of it, career gets cut short. And so she had a family and she had the husband, but years later, her husband got Alzheimer's about 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way that he would come out of the woods in his own confusion was to the sound of her voice, old recordings.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the only thing. And he was about 4 years, I think he died about 18 months ago. And she'd send me the recordings, the beautiful old recordings that she did in the 60s, Thomas Moore. And it just, to me, was heartbreaking, the idea of having that comfort and that memory of the beautiful love he had with her. And other than that, when that little 3 minutes would be over, he was lost in the woods for the next 5 hours. I can't say anything about it except it's
terrifying.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
You know, just what you just put it into words, what I've seen, and it was just interesting to hear it the way you said it. You know,
Yeah.
That the whole identity is memories, what you've done before in the past, what you've experienced.
It's a funny thing to say now, because I do like Beckett, and I think a lot of Beckett is very close to eloquent meditations on aging and dementia. I know the book Murphy, I think Murphy is called. Is it Murphy? There's another word in the title, Murphy something. I remember that book is an extraordinary meditation. If you're close to somebody with Alzheimer's, because it's so amazingly like Alzheimer's, it's so amazingly like dementia. You know, Murphy is in the bed and he's writing with a pencil, and he can't remember who gave him the pencil. And he thinks maybe it's the woman that comes in, but then a woman comes in, he's not sure, is that the woman come in yesterday? Or is this a different pencil? And it is just a beautiful book. There's a lot of Beckett, you know, I think is very powerful for opening up meditation on that painful forest of confusion that people end up in.
Oh, thanks, Michael.
Yeah.
Thank you, Catherine, as well.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Good morning, John.
Good morning, and thank you very much for this wonderful chat, which I've missed most of. I have to apologize. I'm not very good at early mornings, but I'd just like to say that I consider myself a bit of a Philistine when it comes to literature, especially prose and poetry, even though I appreciate it a lot, as I do poetry and storytelling evenings here in my gallery in Cove. And ever since I started working with artists and trying to facilitate artists, I've always believed that mixing up the arts and having the poets and the theatre and the dancing and the music and the painting and the sculpture and bringing all the artists together is the most enriching experience of my life. And I think this program that you do, Alan, can facilitate that to a certain degree. But I believe that Ireland is drastically needing more communication between the artists of our country. I believe we're kept in solitude way too much. And I wonder if you have any ideas how we can possibly bring the artists of Ireland together.
Michael?
Me, I don't really. I have no notion. I think that it's something people do, like Alan is doing it in this, and it's inspired. I know that for me, one of the great innovations was Anna McCarrick, because I was there in 1985, 86, and it was the first time where artists and writers and musicians were actually coming together and socializing. And there was friendships made at that time that lasted a lifetime. Eamon Coleman gave one example. You know, I remember people like Dermot Seymour and Dermot DeLargy and Dermot Healy. Everybody was called Dermot.
That's weird.
That's weird. But yeah, no, the interaction of artists and writers is a hugely fruitful kind of dynamic. And it's more fruitful, I think, than writers mixing with writers. I'm blessed. I'm so lucky to have, you know, had the privilege of sharing my life with a great artist, Kathy Carman. And yeah, and I mean that because that opens the door to so many other wonderful artists. And I think that artists are a really invigorating space for writers to be, rather than other writers.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
That's just my opinion.
Yeah.
So you'd encourage cross-pollination of the arts?
Oh, big time. Yeah, of course. Absolutely. I mean, theatre is very much a cross-pollination. You know, theatre, you know, I go into a rehearsal studio, I might be working with an actor, with a writer, and with, you know, a musician. And then somebody comes in and designs a set and designs costumes. And And
Yes,
there's no more visual art in a sense than theatre, because it's actually visual, but moving, you know, it's living.
But the sad thing about it is I worked in theatre myself for 16 years, painting the sets.
Yeah.
I never got to meet any of the writers or the actors or anybody, because you'd be there working on your own at nighttime painting the set, and they come in and rehearse in the daytime when you're not there. So there isn't really that cross-pollination in theatre, really.
Not in Ireland, definitely not. Ireland follows a kind of an Anglo-Saxon tradition of theatre. The template is West End. Yeah. You know, and that template is about linguistically based psychological argumentative theatre. And that's based on like a 4-week contract for an actor, get it on, paint a set, throw it up and get on to the next one. Yeah. It's very different from the model that's used by, you know, European theatre companies who might work on a play for 2 years and who very often will have an ensemble of performers and artists making the set as they're doing it and evolving it like a community. Yeah, I think the only one in Ireland that works like as an ensemble is Blue Raincoat, but I think in Europe there's much more of that tradition whereby the artist is very much more at the center of theatre, as was Picasso and loads of other artists. And Pina Bausch is a great example. You know, she's well known now. She's passed away a good few years, but I mean, she was an extraordinary dance theatre choreographer whose pieces were essentially visual pieces of art. Yeah. And we've none of that in Ireland. No, we're very impoverished by our link with kind of West End, Broadway. You know, does it have legs? Yeah.
And there's an awful lot of waste as well. I mean, all the sets I painted in my years doing it in Ireland, they all go in a skip afterwards. There's a terrible amount of waste. And
I know, it's absolutely ferocious. Yeah, and some of those sets are like amazingly elaborate pieces of work. And as you said, they just vanish into a skip a week after the show's over, unless they feel it has legs, as they say, which is an awfully cynical idea, you know.
I'm very surprised to hear that they're thrown out like that, because I would have thought they were works of art in themselves and would be. But
there's no storage. No, you know, if you go to somewhere like the Abbey or wherever, they don't have storage for sets.
An auction
house. If they think it's going to come back or keep it in the repertoire, they will keep it. You know, they will store it somewhere.
Yeah, yeah.
But I really believe in the kind of community model of theatre, and I believe in the ensemble, the sense of, you know, working over a long period of time and living a life as a theatre troupe, which is why, in some sense, I like, at the moment, I'm working with Ashtori Guidor in Donegal, and you know, they've been developing a play for the past 6 months. It's a play by Brian Friel, The Enemy Within, and they're doing an Irish language version of it at the end of February. But the funny thing is that in amateur drama and in community theatre groups, you do get a better sense of the sort of, like, you know, the theatre as a community, as a rooted community that is kind of collectively expressing its imaginative ideas. Yeah.
Okay, I'm just going to read out a couple more comments that have been made, if I may. Tim Goulding says, Oscar Wilde said, wisdom comes with age, but sometimes age comes on its own. Not so in your case.
I thought he was going to say appropriate in my case.
Wouldn't put it past him now to say that. Anyway, no. Niamh O'Connor says she'll catch up on Sundays with this. She has to go. Michael is the most impressive of persons, known well in these parts. So Niamh isn't too a million miles away from you, not Donegal, but in Leitrim.
Okay.
Maura Finnegan says Beckett found peace when he stopped fighting the darkness within and simply accepted it as part of his nature. He then decided to put that darkness to work. Siege in the room, waiting for Godot. Marianne says the original Project Art Centre in Dublin was set up with that idea, getting visual artists, writers, musicians together way back in 1967.
Yes.
Jen Donnery says, completely agree, just returned from a week spent in the company of writers at Anna McCarrick. It was so stimulating to hear about their processes. Very special place. Paddy Critchley, big fan. Michael, thanks for all the writing, words, and this interview. Your words have struck me through the dark times, have stuck with me through the dark times and good. And Paddy was on 2 weeks ago on The Art as Well. Robert Kelly says, Michael gives permission to people to be themselves. True too. Okay, listen, thanks everyone for being here in great numbers this morning and from far and wide. And Michael, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us this morning. It was a fascinating chat. Really, really enjoyed it. I was very, very nervous because I really didn't know where anything was going to go. But as you said, that's the beauty of talking off the cuff like this. Have you plans for the future that you'd like to discuss or tell us about?
No.
I go on, you do. I know you do. The art of the memoir is one.
Well, I suppose the podcast is something that I'm really exploring how you can be creative at a sort of a improvisational level, but also like a meditation. So the one thing about my podcast is it's not like radio. It's not like controlled. It's almost like a phone call between me and you.
Yeah.
And so I say things more intimately in the podcast than I would say even at a dinner table.
Sure.
Which scares me in some sense. But I think there is something that I'm developing, and I don't know where it's going.
Well, Michael, on that very point, because you really did take up the podcast concept, or the idea of the podcast, because you weren't doing the touring with Michael Harding. Now, assuming everything goes swimmingly and we're back to normal and all of that sort of stuff, with the pressure of doing that, because presumably that would be your preferred modus operandi, would be to get out there. Would that mean that the podcast might suffer, or would it take a back seat?
No, I'd imagine. I mean, there's a possibility that I'll either tour in the end of this year or sometime next year. But I mean, at that stage, the chance would be that you take the podcast with you. Like the way they do a live podcast.
That's right. Yeah.
They call it a live podcast. It's actually just on stage with an audience, and then it's recorded.
Yes.
But I mean, it seems to me that.
But like this, the audience can ask you questions.
It's the thing about not making a superior practice. Now, somebody mentioned it there about how you have to begin even in midlife with trying different things. And that's absolutely true. And I was like that myself. But I think the gradual journey is trying to find that everything you do, whether it's your painting, your writing, your cooking, your meditation, your prayer, your performance on stage, your playing the flute, whatever, that everything actually becomes just being here now, right? Thich Nhat Hanh, he was a great man for using that phrase, be here now. Just one single thing is to be here now. Yeah. And what a beautiful life, what an extraordinary artistic manifestation his whole life was and is. And I like that idea of be here now, so that if you're podcasting, if I'm podcasting or I'm writing a column, I'm simply doing the same thing all the time. It's just trying to reach out to other people with words as a rope to find some connection. Yeah. Not that the words are true or that they have meaning, but just that they make a color. It's like throwing a stone and making a color in the pool that looks like somebody sees it.
Yes.
That's all.
Beautiful, beautiful. Listen, on that note, we'll wrap up. Thank you again so much, Michael. That was absolutely fascinating. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thank you, Alan.
Next week, we're going to do this all over again, but we're going to do something different because the lockdown is sort of eased. We're actually going to visit an artist in a gallery during her show, all right? Her show is being launched on Thursday, but we're actually going to bring cameras, everything, out to the gallery on Saturday morning, and we're going to chat to her there. And she's done a wonderful video of her studio in Connemara. Some of you might be able to put two and two together, but I'm not saying anything till Wednesday when we formally announce it. So look forward to seeing you then. Thanks again, everybody. Thank you, Michael, especially. And see you again next week, next Saturday. Thank you. Take care.